Thank you. As I was walking up, I heard someone say, "What's GDUFA?" All right. Oh, okay. So thank you all for your attention. I know that I've got a tough role to play here, the first speaker after lunch on the second day. The only worst one is having the last slot on the second day, so I'm grateful for that. But I'm going to try to keep you awake and hopefully interested in user fees, which is always a big task. So today I'm going to talk about things we've noticed in administering the user fee program where a little thing can translate to a big difference, either a good thing or a bad thing. So I'm going to go through some points that we've noticed about facilities, some issues on payments themselves. I'm going to try and show you how things all fit together on our end. And I'm going to talk about the program fee portal, which has been a live issue in the past couple of weeks. So if you remember, GDUFA imposes a user fee on facilities. And the thing that causes that user fee to be incurred is if you're referenced in an approved application. Under GDUFA 1, that was including unapproved applications. So if you're referenced in a pending or approved application, you wind up with a fee. And the problem, well, let me back up. So if you're not supposed to be in an application and you're there, that's a bad thing. It can incur a fee for you, et cetera. So if you want to get out of it, the best way to do it, the preferred way to do it, is to have the sponsor, the owner of the application, submit an amendment or some sort of a notification saying, we don't need that facility anymore. That's the best way to do it because the ANDA is owned by the applicant, not by the facility owner generally. So the preferred method to get out of an application is to have the sponsor get you out. That works the best. So if the sponsor is not willing to cooperate, then there's a problem. And so we recognized early on in GDUFA 1 that there would be facilities who fell into this situation, and we had to work within the constraints of the statute to find a way to make that problem go away because it just wasn't right. And so we came up with an alternate method, which is the self-withdrawal for user fee purposes only. And so in August of 2012, right before GDUFA 1 got started, we issued a Q&A guidance and we outlined a method for facilities who were sort of wrongly identified to get out of this fee so they could get out of the application. And then the way we did that was to come up with the protocol that we laid out in what was question 38 in that Q&A guidance. And so because that's a catchy title, it sounds like a James Bond movie or something, we decided to keep that. So we still call it question 38, even though it's no longer a question and answer format. But what this allowed us to do was there was a way for people to get out of these unjust situations, if you will. And in fiscal year 2013, the first year of GDUFA, we had 43 instances where there were facilities that were wrongly named in applications which were able to take advantage of this to get out of that fee that they would have otherwise had to have paid. And then over the course of GDUFA 1, you'll see here that the number of uses was still relatively substantial, especially if you were in one of those. And it did go down over time. So the protocol sustained through GDUFA 2. In the first year of GDUFA 2, we had 7 cases of it, but they've been dropping. And this year, so far, we've only had 1 case where this has been called into play. Now, because this has been a diminishing problem, because people have learned how to get out of these things, because situations that might have been in pre-GDUFA times were resolved through GDUFA 1, we've gotten less comfortable as an agency with having this mechanism in place to adjust an ANDA by someone other than the ANDA sponsor. So we have issued a revised guidance on this that went out last year, and we're about to issue a revised draft guidance that's going to be coming out sometime soon that changes the protocol for doing this. So that the guidance is going to be coming out sometime soon. We don't exactly know when. And it's going to impose some changes. One of the changes is going to be in the documentation required. Under question 38 in GDUFA 1, the documentation you had to submit was essentially a note saying, hey, we've told them we shouldn't be in there, whether they've done anything about it or not. So here's a copy of it, sever that link for us. Going forward, it's going to have to be copies of the communications you've had with the sponsor showing we've asked them to and they haven't taken us off this application. And there's also going to be some additional requirements about, here's the set of ANDAs or DMFs that we think we're referenced in, even if we don't know for sure. And then all that information is going to be submitted to us to basically say, here's my case. And then we can, assuming we don't find evidence of bad intent, we'll be able to say, okay, for user fee purposes, that link is broken, you're not going to incur the fee. That doesn't work retroactively, so if you miss the October 1 deadline where the fee is actually imposed, we can't go back and fix it. But if you can get it into us before then, that'll help. In the guidance, we're going to specify July 1st to give us time to make sure these things are processed. But the actual imposition of the fee is an October 1st thing. So I hope that makes sense. And what I would ask is that when you do this, submit a copy of it to my office, and I have my email address at the end of the presentation so that we know about it, because the agency is a big place, and if you send something into one place, the two places may not talk to each other. I know that's shocking. And then if you do submit something to us that has an impact on the regulatory scheme, make sure you submit that as well through the ECG or ESG to your file so that it doesn't get lost on that end either. All right, so that was sort of the new approach to withdrawing facilities. Another issue we've run into on the facility side is when sponsors submit a 356H, we're seeing cases where there's some sloppiness. And so I just wanted to point out that if you do have an issue on your 356H where you're referencing a facility that you shouldn't, there's two types of problems that can occur. If you're the sponsor and you're referencing a facility that shouldn't be in your application, and then that facility goes on our arrears list because it doesn't pay the fee, then your entire portfolio as the sponsor can get misbranded until and unless that fee problem goes away. So unless you're willing to pay that fee, if that facility goes on the list, the arrears list, you don't want to have anything to do with them. So I would encourage sponsors to make sure that the facilities you're showing on your 356H are correct, because otherwise that may come back and bite you, not just for you, but your affiliates as well. And then of course, if you're a facility and you're referenced erroneously on an application, that could impose or could incur a fee for you, which I don't think anybody here wants to have. All right, so then the other thing I wanted to point out, a separate issue, is we occasionally run into problems where people say, well, I sent my payment in. And on our side, we're like, okay, but we didn't see it. And so part of the problem there turns out to be that people think it's instantaneous. I mean, in today's age of internet time, they think, oh, I hit the go button, therefore they must have received it. Well, there's 3 different ways to submit these payments to us, and the time associated with them varies considerably. With pay.gov, which is the primary one, so if you were to go do your cover sheet, hit the Pay Now button, it takes you automatically to pay.gov and allows you to pay it that way. That's almost instantaneous. That's as close to instantaneous as we're going to get. So that can sometimes happen the same day. Generally, it's the next business day that we get the payment confirmation on our side so that we can assess the liability to have been satisfied. So that's pretty quick. And at the agency, we get 50, 60,000 payments a year for the different user fee programs. Because, don't forget there's the BSUFA, GDUFA, PDUFA ones, but there's also food user fees, there's device user fees, there's animal user fees. So with all of that stuff coming in, 50,000 plus payments coming in a year is a lot of volume. And so just getting it means, if it comes in through pay.gov, things match up. We have almost a 0% error rate. Things process automatically, require very little manual intervention. So if you want to make sure that, what's that saying from FedEx? If you absolutely need to make sure it gets there or whatever, use pay.gov to the extent you can. Some people that do prefer wire transfers, which is another option. That tends to take between 3 and 5 business days to get to us, sometimes more, sometimes less. The other thing to think about here is what catches people off guard on wire payments is or wire transfers is sometimes there's a wire fee associated with it they didn't anticipate. We had one case early on in GDUFA 1 where a company was submitting a payment through its bank in Paris, and it submitted the payment, it paid the wire transfer fee at the bank in Paris, but the Paris bank had to transmit it through a US-based bank, and when it went there in New York, another wire fee was deducted. And so when the payment got to us, it was missing a $20 or $30 payment wire transfer payment fee, and the liability was not satisfied, and that sponsor lost out on some serious opportunities because we had to go back and forth, and they had to figure out, oh yeah, there was another intermediary bank I didn't know about, therefore I got hosed. So wire transfers seem pretty cool and spiffy and stuff, but they take a little bit longer than pay.gov, and they may have other costs that you have to be aware of. And then the slowest method is Pony Express, otherwise known as Postal Service. And if people send in a check, it can take 5 to 7 business days or even longer to get to us, get to the bank, get processed so that we have the funds in our account and we can declare the user fee obligation satisfied. We even have people sending us checks from overseas. And so if you have international postal service, there can be delays associated with that. So checks and wire transfers have it's not a huge error rate, but it's in the range of 5 to 10%, sometimes more. And if you're in that 5 to 10%, that's a problem for you. So if you have time constraints, if you have an NC-1 situation, if you have some other deadline you have to meet, maybe it's a quarterly submission thing for your shareholders, make sure you understand, or your accountants understand, the different delays associated and the different risks associated with submitting payments through these different options. So we have to do a lot of back and forth if these things come in and they don't come in on time and someone calls us and says, but I paid you, and we haven't seen it. Speaking of which, this is the connect the dots part. Sometimes we'll just magically get a check for $2 million. Bob Smith. Okay, is that for me? Can I take this? This is my slush fund? No, it doesn't work that way. So what happens is the accountants in our Office of Financial Management, which is where all the true accounting magic happens, have to do a lot of manual work to figure out what the heck this is supposed to be for. And so the basic message here is the more information you can provide about what the payment is for, the better off we'll be. This is where pay.gov has almost a 0% error rate, because you can't get to pay.gov unless you've already established a cover sheet or paying an invoice or something like that. And when you do that, the amount is correct, to whom is correct, from whom is correct, all that information has already been verified. And so most of the pay.gov payments come in virtually no manual intervention whatsoever. It's automatic, it's fast, it's accurate, it's perfect. Something else, if we get a check or a wire transfer and it says payable to Bob Smith or to John's account or something like that, that's when our accountants have to pick it up and manually deal with it. And that's a very laborious process. And if you've got, like I was saying, 50 or 60,000 payments coming in for 12 or 15 different user fee programs, the accountants want to get as much done as they can quickly to maximize their time. And so if something comes in that requires a lot of manual research, it's going to take them some time to get to it. It's going to take them some time to do it. Those things require a lot of back and forth with the company. They have to send emails, try and make phone calls. If somebody's around the other side of the world, the time difference can make it really problematic to communicate. So these things cause delays in the process, and that's never good for anyone. So if you have a cover sheet number, if you have an invoice number, make sure that's clearly spelled out on your check if you're doing that, your wire transfer if you're doing that. Like I said, if it's a pay.gov thing, then you're not going to have that problem. That'll be okay. But these things can introduce delays of a week or 2 weeks, or in some really bad cases, we may never be able to figure out where it goes. Now, eventually someone's going to call and say, I sent you a check for $2 million and you cashed it. What's going on? So if we can get somebody on the phone that way or get a contact by email or whatnot, then we can try and figure it out. We can do some basic questions like, which user fee program are you doing this for? If it's a GDUFA thing, which type of fee? Is it an application fee? Is it a whatever? And so we can, eventually we'll figure it out, but the delay that's associated with that is not something that's working in your favor. You don't want that. So I would encourage you to make sure that whoever's handling your payments, make sure that all that information is there so that there's minimal confusion. Another thing that we've seen is there's a lot of companies that have similar sounding names. And if you're at that company, it's going to be second nature. You live it, you breathe it, it's not a problem. But keep in mind, the accounting folks deal with programs from the gamut of animal drugs to devices to human drugs. And they may not be as fluent in those naming conventions as you are. So they may not appreciate that this actually is the same thing, or this is actually different. And so if they're in a situation where they're trying to apply a check or a wire transfer or something, and the connection is not clear and they have to connect those dots on their own, you may get some really funky matches, and they may not be in your favor. Or they may be in somebody else's favor, and you may wind up paying for someone else's location fees or facility fee, which is very generous of you, but I wouldn't recommend it. So again, the more information you can provide, the more timely that information, making sure someone's available to answer questions, these things will make it easier for our folks to do their job so that you're not disadvantaged in any timing issues or meeting your user fee obligations or things like that. So yeah, the wire transfer is probably the highest error rate, followed by checks, and then pay.gov is the best. So I'm trying to catch up a little bit on the time that we missed this morning, but I do want to talk about the program fee portal. This is sort of the last part of my talk, but it's, I think, the most important and timely. The program fee portal is something that we're relying on this year for the first time. We did have it available last year, but we didn't use it as much. In the past, let me take one step back. For the program fee, which is new in GDUFA 2, we had to connect applications with owners. And you'd think that's a simple thing, and in many ways it is. But because of affiliates and all that sort of thing, we had to make sure we grouped people by your company and your affiliates. And so in the first year of Doofah, we used an Excel sheet. Many of you may have been involved in pulling that off our website and matching it against your records and reporting differences where we hadn't captured something correctly or whatever. And that worked out really well. You guys were very good at giving the information back to us, at helping us uncover discrepancies and resolving them. And we were able to do a fairly accurate job on the program fee side to make sure that we took the right number of entities into account when setting the fees and then collecting the right amount of money. And as a quick update, this year so far for the program fee, we are off by $59 or $56 for the Doofah program fee, which is something like a $172 million program. So that's a really low error rate. So thank you for your help on that. That's helped us get there. And so the vision for this program fee portal is to take what we did together in Excel and do it automatically in the system. And the system here is Panorama. This is the system that's used as a workflow backbone for the entire drug review process. And it houses information on facilities and DMFs and applications and all this sort of thing. And the goal is to say, okay, here's our data set. Open the kimono and say, these are the things we think we know about you and your applications and your affiliates, and give you a chance to say, yeah, that's not quite right, or yeah, this is good, or whatever. And so the portal is open 24/7, 365. You can go in and check this stuff anytime, but we do have a deadline. There's an annual cycle where we have to set the fees each year. And so we have asked people to get their information in by April 1st if they're withdrawing applications or transferring ownership or things like that, to help us understand how many companies with their affiliates fall into each of the three tiers, the small, medium, and large. And so we are live with this. This is the address. I believe somebody earlier talked about the portal yesterday afternoon. And so things are, from a technical perspective, working. But one thing that I do want to talk about is we have come across issues. We had opened this up hoping that we could confirm that things were right, or if they weren't, to identify those areas where we needed to do some work on our end. And boy, did that work. I don't know if anybody in this room was involved in this, but we have gotten a lot of feedback from sponsors saying, I told you last year that this was this, and this year the data are showing it's wrong again. And so there were many different areas where people had issues when they went into the program fee portal. They were able to find things that didn't look quite right. They were not what they had told us before, which is a problem from our perspective because, on the technical side, our IT folks ran all these tests. They tried to make sure everything worked. On the program side, my staff did a lot of user acceptance testing, trying to make sure that all these things matched up properly. And still we found errors, and I apologize for that. But this going live this way was really the best user acceptance testing we could have imagined because you guys were very strict about looking at things, and most of you are not shy about telling us when we have problems. So we appreciate that, and that's helped us uncover a handful of different types of problems. So I'm going to run through some of those now. But before I do that, let me just say that a lot of these problems were unanticipated. They were things we wouldn't have thought to look for. They were connections or tests we didn't think to ask if they were right. And so by finding these problems and bringing them to our attention, you've helped us make much more robust the back-end system that populates what you see. So on the FDA side, things that we didn't do right, there were some data inconsistencies associated with how the different systems we have in the background talk to each other. So we have two major systems. There's DARTS and Panorama. DARTS is the system that was in use until Panorama came on the stage, and a lot of information is still stored and processed in DARTS. And so the two have to talk to each other, and they do that. There's periodic overnight batches where they upload here and download there, which is way beyond my count. I can't understand that stuff. But in case they do this, but there are some things, some fields didn't match up. There were some business algorithms that didn't quite match. And with your help, we were able to identify them. And so the ones that were system things, and there were a handful of them where the status didn't change when it was supposed to or whatnot, and that threw everything for a loop. We've identified those, we've fixed most of those, and hopefully going forward, you won't see those problems at all. There were also parent company or affiliate issues. And so some of those are bad because there were some issues we hadn't checked for on our end, which we've now fixed. Some of them, it turns out, were cases where maybe last year somebody at your company had reported, here's my set of things, here's my affiliates, here's my parent relationship. And then this year someone new is doing it. and they're using a different DUNS number because you have multiple DUNS numbers. And so when they go into the portal looking up their DUNS number, the one from this year that they think is correct, and it's actually correct, it's just not the same one as was reported last year, it doesn't work with the data that's shown in our system. So when you look at the portal, it looks like something is not working right. But in fact, it's just that we have different data from the company. So one thing I would ask of you all is if you do have a shift from, Joe was handling it last year and Mary's handling it this year, make sure that Joe and Mary coordinate or they're working from the same set of data. It's easy to get a DUNS number for something, and we often see cases where there's a DUNS number for this address of a company, a different one for this address of the company, but they're different doors to the same building. And so, things like that can happen, and we don't have any way of knowing. We can verify your DUNS number against the DMV database, which is part of our protocol, but both of them are correct. Both of them belong to you. And so we can validate to our heart's content, but it's not going to matter if you're telling us different DUNS numbers. So that's one of the issues where we have to work together to make sure that there aren't these discrepancies. There were some ANDA issues where you had said, I withdrew these things, or I transferred an ownership to someone else. But for different reasons, either that didn't make it into our system, or technically because withdrawals have to have a Federal Register notice published to make them technically effective. That hasn't happened yet, so the system is still showing them as not having been withdrawn, even though you've done everything you should be doing. Paperwork is all in, it's just working its way through a very cumbersome system. So we're aware of those and we're working on them. So in all of these cases, if there is something that isn't working right, if you see any data discrepancies, if you know that you've already told us something and it's not reflected there yet, I would ask you to talk to my staff. So I'm going to have my contact information on the last slide, but my staff are standing by. We have a shared mailbox and a shared phone line that are monitored during business hours. And if you reach out to them, they will work with you and just say, we've noticed all sorts of discrepancies. Can you help us figure out what's going on? And then they'll work with you. They'll go back and forth and make sure that the information is actually correct. Even if it's not showing as correct, we can reassure you that in the backside it is actually correct. It will be corrected on the portal as soon as we can get the technical side of that done. So those things will be fixed. And then going forward for next year, we're hoping that having gone through this sort of very rigorous deep dive on how accurate things are, we won't have these issues. We'll be free to make new mistakes or have new issues crop up, but we look forward to those. So going forward, make sure that when you're submitting something, whether it's on a 356H or when you're updating something with a new affiliate or something like that, make sure it's correct. And if it's not correct, reach out to my staff and we can make sure things do line up. Don't be shy about that. And if at any point you have questions, just go ahead and reach out to my staff. With that, the reference materials here, this is, the GDUFA is a great source of information on the program in general. And then the CDER Collections is the shared mailbox for my office. We have somebody monitoring that every day during business hours. And then we have a shared phone line that's manned with a live person during business hours. There's a voicemail function if you call outside those hours, and we will get back to you. My expectation for my staff is that the phone during business hours will be answered within 2 or 3 rings. On the 4th ring, it rings over to my phone. So if you hear my voice, then my staff didn't pick up in time. But they generally do. Very few of you actually hear me on the line because of that. So my staff do a very good job of answering the phone. And if you send us an email, we'll get back to you within a day or 2 max, depending on our workload and whatever else is going on. So with that, we have 15 minutes or so left. I'd like to open it for questions if there are any, or if not, I will be happy to leave and get out of your hair.
Oh, we're not going to let you off that easy. This is going to be a bit different since it's money that matters, rather than having Donal come back for a panel. We are going to open it up for questions. I know we've got some questions online, but again, you know how the game is played. If there's any questions in the room, please feel free to come up to the microphones. And while we're waiting for that, let's go ahead and start with our first online question, please.
What is the difference between self-ID and paying of the facility fee? If you self-ID, do you have to pay?
So we get this question a lot. Self-identification is a different requirement under the law from the user fee. So just self-identifying does not necessarily trigger a user fee obligation for you. Now, if you're self-identifying as a manufacturing facility that happens to be referenced in an approved application, then you will have to pay a fee, or you'll incur a fee, But that's not because you self-identified, it's because you're referenced in an approved application. So if you're required to self-identify for some reason other than user fees, you know, you're a testing facility that doesn't incur a fee, but you're still referenced and you have to identify, I would encourage you not to self-identify, sorry for that language, in the fear that you'll have to pay a fee. You're gonna have to pay a fee at some point if your application is successful, but don't not self-identify for that reason, because not self-identifying can trigger other penalties and it may affect the timing of a review. I'm not saying it does, I don't do the review, so I don't know for sure, but you know, I'm just encouraging you not to self-identify for fear of having to pay a fee. That's gonna come at you whether you want it or not, regardless, but that's not triggered by self-identification.
All right, over to microphone number 1, please.
All right. Thank you for discussing GDUFA with us. I just wanted to confirm, though, for the portal, in terms of submitting through the FDA.gov for our PDUFA payments.
Sorry, for PDUFA payments?
For PDUFA payments,
Okay.
will those also go through the portal as well, or do you want us to still do those?
So typically we do the PDUFA billing differently. We currently have an invoicing process. I believe, and don't quote me on this because I'm not sure I've got this right, but I think you can go into pay.gov and pay with the invoice number that we sent you. So if you use that instead of a cover sheet number, you know, I think you may have to create a cover sheet anyways, but you can use the invoice number on that to make sure the payments get linked. That way you don't pay for someone else's facility.
Microphone number 2, step on up, please.
Since the fee is not due till, facility fee is not due till we receive the first approval. Inspection is not linked to the fees, no? I'm just asking for clarification.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, the question is, inspections are not linked to the facility fee, is that correct?
Yeah, for the first time.
Exactly. So the way it works is, and this is also a common misperception where people sort of get things confounded. The type of fee you pay is not linked to a particular type of service. So the way I like to describe it is there's this mythical great big iron cauldron in the lobby of our building, and all of the user fee payments go into that bucket. And then when we have to pay someone to review a drug or review a DMF or to do an inspection, we pull the money out of there to pay them. And we have no idea if the dollar we're pulling out came from an inspection or a facility fee payment or an application fee payment. All we know is that it was a GDUFA payment paying for a GDUFA service. So there's no link per se between facility payments and inspections of those facilities. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Okay, great. But that is something that we encounter regularly. It's a common misperception that I've been trying to fight over the years. So.
All right, Ray, let's get another online question, please.
When does an API facility have to actually pay the facility fee?
Tuesday. No, I'm just kidding. So the API facility, just like the FDF facility, incurs a fee if it's referenced in an approved ANDA as of the fee due date each year, which is generally October 1st or the beginning of our fiscal year. So if it's an API facility that's first referenced in an approved application, say October 2nd, it doesn't have to pay the fee until the following October 1st. It gets a free ride for 364 days. If it's referenced on September 30th for the first time in an approved application, it owes the fee the next day.
And again, if there's any questions in the room, come on up to the microphone, but let's go ahead with our next online question, please.
What is the first date we are able to make GDUFA payments so we can avoid getting close to the October 1st date?
Great question, thank you. We publish the fee rates in roughly the first week of August each year. And then generally we open the doors, if you will, at the payment system around September 1st-ish, the first week of September. So that's known internally as the crossover period. So during those 2 months, well, in the month of September, for example, you can actually go in and pay the current fiscal year's payment or fee and the subsequent year's fee. And so it's very careful, it's very important when you're doing that to make sure you select the right fiscal year. So when you go in, make sure that the fee is the right one. So if you're coming in this September to pay the upcoming fee, you make sure it's fiscal year 2020, for example.
Another one?
If an ANDA applicant submits an ANDA and does not pay their GDUFA ANDA application fee within 20 days of submission, will the ANDA be rejected and will the applicant be responsible for the application fee?
So generally what happens if a sponsor submits an ANDA application and there's no fee paid for it, my office will reach out and say, hey, you didn't pay the fee. There's 20 days from the date of this letter for you to pay that obligation. and that's required under statute. And then the sponsor will have 20 days to pay. If they don't pay within that time, we will issue a fee-related RTR, refuse to receive. What that means is your application is rejected and you don't get any of that back. There's no refund. If it's an RTR for scientific reasons after it's filed, or even during the filing process, but after it makes it past my office, you do get a percentage of that back. But if it's a fee-related RTR, you don't get any of that money back. So the only exception to that 20-day window is if you or an affiliate are on the arrears list. So if you're affiliated with, this goes back to one of the points earlier, if you're affiliated with the owner of a facility that's on the arrears list, for example, you don't get that 20 days. You're automatically and immediately RTR'd, no chance of getting a refund. So this is where it's also important to make sure that you know that the facilities you have referenced in your applications are right, make sure they're paid, make sure you're not affiliated with somebody who is on the arrears list.
Microphone number 2, please.
This is with reference to API Excipient Mix Facility Fee, where the guidance gives an example of stability. For example, if amorphous form of API as is not stable, then you have to make it stable with an excipient mix, and then it will still be treated as an API from the facility fee perspective.
Yes.
So is it only for stability, or can there be a premix, which is actually an intermediate for a formulation? Will the FDF fee apply there, or since it's being done in the API facility, can we still pay the API facility fee?
So you're pushing the limits of my knowledge because this is getting into the scientific side, which is not my forte. But if I recall correctly, and I may get this wrong, so I'm sort of laying that out there. If you have to mix the API with something to stabilize it for shipment or transport or storage or something, that is by definition excluded from the next step, the manufacturing step. However, I think anything beyond that is considered part of the manufacturing for the FDF. So if you take the API and mix it with something to make it smell good, I don't know if that's a thing, that's going to be considered part of the manufacturing process. So, for stability reasons, it's fine. It's considered just part of the API. But if it's anything beyond that, it really does get into the manufacturing of the FDF end of things, and that will trigger the FDF fee.
Next online question, please.
What is the penalty if an ANDA applicant never pays the ANDA filing fee for an RTR'd ANDA?
What is the penalty if a sponsor never pays for an application that was RTR'd? So there's really no penalty. Once the application's RTR'd, it's sort of sitting out there in limbo, and it becomes the sponsor's decision and right to decide when or if to resubmit. If the sponsor never resubmits, it sits out there and nothing ever happens to it.
Okay. Another online question, Ray?
Can you briefly describe the fee waiver for the first ANDA?
It is not a thing. So there is no first application waiver. There's generally no waivers in GDUFA anyway. The question may be asking about the PDUFA equivalent, because in PDUFA, if you qualify as a small business and it's your first application, you get a pass essentially on the PDUFA application fee, which is like $2.5 million. So it's substantially above the GDUFA one. And so obviously that's a very valuable thing. And so we have a lot of people saying, hey, I'm a small business, exempt me. But they only get that once. If they have already submitted or an affiliate has already submitted an application in PDUFA, they don't qualify for that. And so we'll turn them down. However, in GDUFA, there is no equivalent. So there's no first application pass or anything like that.
And if there are more questions, we've still got a few minutes left. Feel free to come up to the microphones, but let's take our next online question, please.
Do you have to pay the ANDA fee, FDF facility fee, and program fee yearly if you manufacture and own one ANDA?
So let me just make sure I'm understanding. So do you have to pay the application fee and the facility fee annually? So the application fee is a one-time thing. That's triggered by the submission of the ANDA. And so that's a one-time thing. You don't have to pay that annually. On the facility fee front, as long as the facility is referenced in an approved application, that will become due every year. And that's due at the beginning of the fiscal year, October 1st.
All right, next question, Ray. You got any more back there?
The question says, I understand that API manufacturers have to pay a fee for approved ANDAs, but do manufacturers of API intermediates have to pay a facility fee?
So here's where my lack of scientific knowledge comes to be very visible. If the question is about an intermediate that becomes an API, that is something predecessor to the API, then my understanding, and I could be wrong again, is that that doesn't incur a fee. However, if the intermediate is beyond the stage of an API on the way to an FDF, then that would incur the FDF facility fee. And my staff are watching, so if I'm wrong, they're going to correct me when I get back, and I can issue a retraction.
Got another one, Ray?
In the event a user fee has been paid in error, could you briefly explain the availability of a recourse to recover the fee paid?
So under Section M of the statute, there is a provision to allow for the recovery of a fee that was paid in error. It doesn't define what error is. And so if somebody does come to us and say, we goofed, and here's what our goof was, then we have to evaluate that on its merits and see if it does qualify as an error. If it does, we can give it back. The catch is that request has to be made in writing within 180 days of the day that payment was made. So if you paid it, with the application you submitted, you have 180 days from that date to say, hey, we goofed, here's the error, please give us our money back. If it's beyond that 180 days, there's nothing we can do. We don't have the latitude to say, well, we're going to forget about that part of the law, and we're going to give you your money back. We don't do that. We can't do that. Excuse me. And the request does have to come in writing. Generally, we accept emails as writing, even though it's just electronic blips. But if we don't hear from you until after that 180 days, then your window is closed. So, and I can't really give an example of what errors are because they could be anything. So we don't define it. But it can't be that I changed my mind and didn't want to do it. Something like that isn't going to hold a lot of water. People have tried.
All right, have we got one more? We've got time for just one more. You got another one back there? Ray's searching the online questions coming in. All right, I'm going to add any closing thoughts from you to wrap us up, Don?
So again, if you were caught up in the testing, if you will, of the program fee portal and had problems, I apologize. But I do appreciate those of you who reached out to my staff and said, hey, this isn't working with Gives. That really helped us uncover some issues and hopefully made it a much more robust platform for next time around. And don't forget, if you have an application that gets approved, you'll see it very quickly in the platform. So I would encourage you, if you do have a change to your situation, you have a new affiliate, you sold off some stuff, check it in the platform as you go. That way we're not at a rush. My staff are working like overtime right now because of all the stuff coming in on the program fee side. So if you can get those sort of spread out over time, it makes everything easier for us, makes response time faster for you. And I appreciate your patience as we went through this. So with that, I'll be around for the rest of the afternoon if you want to corner me afterwards. So thank you very much.